In this month's episode of Speak Out and Play, I will discuss the current state of the wargaming hobby, provide more details about the Warfighter 29 series, tell you what's in the works for Seek Out and Play YouTube channel, and show the coming attractions for June, all coming up on Speak Out and Play. Hello and welcome to Speak Out and Play, a monthly podcast focused on the print, card and board, or chit wargaming hobby. Each month I talk about the goings-on about wargaming and the what-all in a tidy 20 minutes or so. So, any guesses as to the title of the podcast that I've chosen for this month? I bet you didn't notice it until now, huh? Can't say I blame you. It's from an episode of a television series that ran for one season back in the 1970s. Post your guesses in the comments section below. And no, it's not from a war-oriented series, but bad things did happen in it. Spring. It's been a wet one in the month of May, followed by a few cool days, and now the heat of summer is starting to arrive. That means I've got a few more days of enjoying the great outdoors before the mosquitoes take over and drive me back to the gaming table. So I guess there's some good news in that. I've been playing war games since the mid-1970s during its golden age, and as the old saying, the more things change, the more they stay the same, it still resonates. In fact, it's the first subject of this here podcast, so let's get to it. I start the podcast with something that I read on a Facebook group page. Now, before you run away, I'm not going into a rant against what was said, but rather speak about the hobby itself and how the post relates to the current state of wargaming. In essence, the post I read was about a person who had purchased 3 successive war games from different companies that all turned out to be either incomplete or have poorly written rules, or perhaps were not play-tested extensively enough. The post didn't really get into any more detail than that, which made it rather unproductive in terms of getting something done, although it did stir things up, which seemed to be the intent. So instead of firing back and starting yet another barroom brawl on a Facebook group page, which I have a well-deserved reputation for doing, I decided instead to make this the subject of my podcast and perhaps demonstrate a different perspective of what I believe is happening to the hobby today in terms of such games coming out. First, I do not doubt that there are war games that are poorly produced, that are incomplete, and that have not been play-tested enough. All of those things and more have been part of the wargaming hobby since it started. Even back in the glory days when companies like Avalon Hill spent years creating, developing, and finally producing a game, there would be errors, gaffes, and sometimes outright howling mistakes that make you wonder if anyone had proofread the rules before shipping it out the door. With the plethora of new games being produced today at a more rapid pace, it's not surprising that some war games will have errors. Even though today we use computers with spell check and grammar correction built in, as someone who writes quite a bit each day, I have made numerous mistakes that somehow get by without the programs themselves catching them. But then again, what I write generally doesn't take that long. Working on a game should take years, all things considered, and yet the number of mistakes, errors, and downright goofs seems to be just as prevalent today as it was back then when they didn't have spell check and Grammarly and all these other corrective programs. So why is that? Why, with all the attention paid to developing a war game, do so many mistakes still make it through? Unfortunately, there is no one simple answer, and some of the errors can be attributed to the many different games well outside the wargaming field. But there are a few that can only be attributed to the wargaming hobby itself. So let's start with the obvious one, complexity. In general, the more complex a game, the more rules needed to cover the complexity, the more apt such rules are to be to contain mistakes. From simple spelling errors to fundamental mistakes in the rules themselves, the higher the mountain of complexity, the greater the chances for those creating the rules to fall off by overlooking basic mistakes. Most spelling errors can be caught by spell check programs, although one type of error that often gets through is when the misspelled word isn't really misspelled at all. It is actually spelled as another word, which means that when that word is put into the sentence, it can pass as being spelled correctly, even if it doesn't make any sense. There are some programs that can catch that type of error, but there are other programs that do not. And thanks to the English language, such errors can happen more often than not. Another common error is when the rules writer writes into the rules an earlier concept that had been corrected in playtesting. War games in particular go through several stages over the course of their creation. That means that a series of concepts that evolve as more playtesting reveals the issues that must be corrected at a later stage. But when the writing gets into the final rules, the designer can accidentally include an earlier concept of the rules instead of the final one. Again, the greater the complexity, the more likely it is to forget the corrected concepts and go with the earlier ones. I can speak as a writer. If I'm writing a fictional story, sometimes it goes through several drafts, but I like saving some of those earlier drafts because that gives me other ideas about what direction I can go. But then when it comes down to the final piece, it's not all that uncommon that I might put in an earlier concept that I had in a previous draft and put that into the final copy. And then it's only when I read it again, or only when somebody else points it out, that I realize, wait a minute, that doesn't really work. So that type of error can happen. Another type of error that often occurs is a result of incomplete playtesting, which means the lack of proper play balance. The rules themselves can be clear, properly written, and even well tested in terms of what the designer is trying to achieve. But play balance errors only really show up when someone is thinking outside the box and employs strategies that were not covered in playtesting. Perhaps the most famous or infamous example was in a game called A Few Acres of Snow. It not only was well received when it was released, it won a Charles S. Robert Award to boot. And yet, a group of people discovered, or a single person discovered, that if the British employed a strategy known as the Halifax Hammer, it shifted the play balance heavily toward the British player, perhaps up to 90% or more. So bad was the play balance distortion that the designer had to create a new set of rules which still didn't quite bring the play balance back to 50-50. And all of that came from playtesting, where no one apparently thought of using the Halifax Hammer type of strategy, or at least they didn't play it enough times to know how badly it upset the play balance. Now, it should be noted that while a 50-50 play balance is the most desired for two-player and hopefully multiplayer games, most often than not, it's never really achieved. This isn't necessarily a flaw in the design, but rather the way the game itself is presented. 55-45 may not be perfect. Even 60-40 is certainly not perfect, but often that's acceptable, especially when the players are of different experience levels. For solitaire games, a play balance is often 60% or more against the player. This is to make the game more challenging and winning more gratifying, although that does depend on the game itself, as sometimes the goal is not winning, but enjoying the experience that the game provides. Warfighter example, even if I easily win the mission, I often have a pretty good time and don't really care that maybe the play balance isn't all that great. So what can be done about addressing the continuing issue of wargames having errors? I think the first thing to do is recognize that people, including game designers, developers, and playtesters, are not perfect. And that if errors have been going on since wargaming began, well, you can count on a certain number to continue no matter what. If the goal is to avoid major errors, such as play balance issues or rules that are not clear or subject to different interpretations as opposed to being just words misspelled, the answer is both direct and difficult to achieve. Wargaming is a business, and as a business, games must be produced and made available for sale, which means that such games must be gotten to the public if they're going to make money from them. The pressure to produce enough games to keep the company afloat is balanced by the time needed to fully test the game so that it is free at least of the most debilitating errors. Even the best is not going to catch every dotted I or crossed T, but enough time is needed to ensure that decent play balance and clarity of the concepts the game provides. The bottom line is really a catch-22. If you reduce the number of war games being published to ensure that errors such as play balance or significant rules problems are minimized, then you might not publish enough games to keep your company afloat. And then if you publish enough games to keep your company afloat, well, then you might have to cut a few corners in order to get the game out there. And that could lead to, again, play balance issues and other major errors. It's an issue that has been present, is still going on, and will probably be with us until the economics of game publishing change. I'd say the best that can be done is to expect that games, especially the more complicated ones, are going to contain some basic rule errors, and some will have more than others. And that games with such errors, questions should be directed at the game company itself or the game designer itself if he makes himself available for specific answers. Going on social media and complaining about it makes for some, nice discussion material, but that's about it. It doesn't really cause much to happen as opposed to going directly to the person or people behind the game and addressing them with your issues. And speaking of discussion material, next up is the ever-evolving series of Warfighter and its core sets and expansions. Well, first off in Warfighter Corner, I have yet to receive Warfighter NAM as of the recording of this podcast. Now, when I do, I will produce at least a few videos on how the game works. Warfighter Chittor is still some time away, as the Kickstarter was only completed a month or so ago. I do not know what other Warfighter releases are on the horizon for DVG, but I can say that the World War II era does have a couple of core set openings in terms of Russia and the China-Burma-India theater. But whether that is next on their list or not, I have no idea. So for this podcast, let's turn to my latest series on the game, Warfighter 29. Warfighter 29 is a new series that I have started on the Warfighter series. It's designed to be a fast start to playing many of the missions that Warfighter has to offer. It is based on the minimum resource point number found on the location and objective cards during the hostile reinforcement phase, or the hostile placement phase, really. The lower the number, the fewer the hostiles appear when a new location card is played, or the objective is activated. The minimum number listed on all the cards is 29, which is a great balancing factor for each mission. As your team gets reduced in resource points value during the expenditure of weapons, gear, or even soldiers, the number of hostiles that show up get reduced. So far, I have created squads for the U.S. Army in Europe, China, Australia, and the UK. My plan is to create 29-point teams for all nationalities that are either part of the core set or have at least 2 expansion packs. So nationalities like the Gurkhas, for example, which only have 1 expansion pack, they may not have enough to work with to get a really good 29-point team, but hey, the emphasis is on the word may. You never know. So when I get a chance to take a look at it and play some out, I'll let you know. Over the next several months, I will mix in different teams that I have created with their own videos, along with the standard unboxing videos for expansions and rules explanations that I present on the channel. The good part about the Warfighter 29 concept is that no new rules are needed. You can play many of the missions with just 29 points, which means you start each mission with a team at 29 points. It's pretty good for missions that go up to maybe 60 to 70 points, at least as far as I can see. Now, really long missions, with objectives at like Space 10 or 11 that are like well over 100 points, I don't know if you can make it. Maybe you can. I'd love to find out, but I'm probably going to stick with the smaller missions as for right now. I primarily created Warfighter 29 as an entry-level concept for new players who are still trying to put together teams for each mission. So local knowledge is a skill that overcomes one of the biggest challenges in playing with just one player soldier, which is the ability to find location cards. Now, personally, I still prefer to play with 2 player soldiers at least, But Warfighter 29, which, mostly limits it to one, does tend to play a lot faster. And especially with teams that I've already created, so I can just jump straight into the missions. And that's really the point, is that you learn how to create one-player teams. Maybe you create several one-player teams for a particular nationality. Now you're ready to jump into a larger mission and you want to play with 2 or more player soldiers. All you have to do is bring up each player soldier that you've already created. So you've cut the creation time in half or maybe more. It also works for Warfighter players who want to play a quick mission. My hope is that other players can pipe in with their own creations so that a forum can be created. I can't think of everything. So players who have different ideas about how to create the best 29-point teams are encouraged to share their creation in the comments section. But Warfighter isn't the only game that gets videos. So what is in the works on the Seek Out and Play YouTube channel for the near future? I am currently working on several videos that will be produced over the course of the next couple of weeks after the release of this here podcast. Because I have other projects outside of wargaming that I must do, I try to schedule the production of new videos at different times. So far, it's worked out better than expected, although I am running into one issue, which, all things considered, is kind of a good thing to have. Because I'm not flooded with new games coming to my door, I have to make the most out of the older games that I have. So I've been working on different types of videos to explore the games that I currently own in my collection. The basic setup for the YouTube channel, in case you haven't caught on by now, is that the first week of each month I present longer videos that tend to cover bigger subjects, such as how to play a game, or personal essays, or covering basic concepts in wargaming in general. The second week is Warfighter Week, and the third week covers optional rules, play examples, and similar concepts of games outside of Warfighter. But while that's a wide coverage area for my channel, it does leave some areas open in terms of what is not covered. One of which is the larger rule sections of games that the typical 3 to 5 minute video which I make cannot hope to cover. A good example is a new video that I'm creating about team play rules in Upfront. The rules section is considerably more substantial compared to the typical optional rules that I have covered for games. So, the video itself is going to be longer. Now, I understand that the audience for team play and Upfront is probably going to be less than the number of people who can play Upfront as a team game. Given that most of my most watched videos are games that can be played solitaire, I'm pretty sure that this video will probably be heavily avoided by all but the most avid Upfront fans who have 2 or 3 friends ready to play with them on a regular basis. But sometimes to go forward, you must cover ground that not everyone is going to like. I'm certainly open to suggestions about what subjects to cover for future videos that may range up to more of the 8 to 10 minute range. Now, this does rule out reviews, full playthroughs, and extensive list videos, which I've avoided like the plague to make. But it does cover a wide range of subjects. So if you have some ideas, please let me know in the comments below. But that's what's going to be coming up over the next several months for the Seek Out and Play YouTube channel. What's happening next month on Seek Out and Play? Well, here are the coming attractions for June 2024. The first Wednesday in June 2024 brings the next part of the personal essay series, Fog of War. The video provides a definition and effects of Fog of War in terms of wargaming. This is a personal expression about what Fog of War is, how it applies during the game, and how game designers incorporate Fog of War into wargaming. The personal essay series is part of an overall exploration of general wargaming concepts. The discussion is about ideas and directions which provide the viewer with a better overall understanding of typical gaming concepts. The second Wednesday in June 2024 brings the unboxing of World War II expansion number 80, Italian Partisans. The video provides a brief history of the partisans in Italy after the surrender of the fascist government, but it mostly showcases the cards found in the expansion, which includes the soldiers, weapons, skills, missions, objectives, events, and hostiles that players will have to face. The video is designed to showcase a range of cards found in the expansion and provide a general overview of their attributes. Plus, it features the rich history that shows the determination of the partisans to free their land. The third Wednesday in June 2024 features a short video that explains the rules governing how prisoners and guards work in Up Front, a game by Wargames Vault that was originally sold by Avalon Hill. The video covers how prisoners are taken, how they are guarded, and what happens when the guard is killed or routed. The video is designed to summarize the prisoner and guard rules so that upfront players can quickly incorporate the concepts into their game. Check out more videos on Upfront and other Avalon Hill games when you visit the Seek Out and Play YouTube channel. Also, I have an X and Facebook page which delivers news about the channel, along with a monthly podcast that you can find on Spotify and BuzzFeed. And if you want to support my efforts in maintaining the channel, my Patreon page allows members access to new videos and podcasts 48 hours in advance. Check out more videos on the Seek Out and Play YouTube channel, and I will see you next Wednesday. Thank you for listening to the Speak Out and Play podcast. For Patreon subscribers, you can listen to the podcast on the Friday before the last Wednesday of each month. For those who are not Patreon subscribers, you can find the podcast on Buzzsprout and Spotify, posted on the Monday before the last Wednesday of each month. Plus, the podcast is released on the Seek Out and Play YouTube channel on the last Wednesday of each month. My YouTube channel releases a new video each week, so I will see you next Wednesday. And if you see Sally, bring her all the way home.